Hey guys, tonight we're taking a trip to ancient Egypt. Not the golden, glowing postcard version with smooth pyramids and glistening pharaohs, but the crusty, crumb-filled, stomach-grumbling side they don't show on the hieroglyphs. You're waking up a mudbrick house, wrapped in linen that's stiff from yesterday's sweat and a bit of Nile dust. Your stomach growls like a hippo in mating season. You stretch, yawn, and immediately gag a little from the smell of last night's leftovers. Welcome to breakfast in 1300 BC. Think it's everywhere. You thought beach picnics were gritty? Try eating next to a desert that quite literally moves into your kitchen. You chew on what you think is a date, but your teeth crunch on something suspicious. Spoiler alert, it's not a date pit. It's actual sand. And unless you're one of the elite, like my dad's statue is 30 feet tall elite, this is your daily menu. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Bonus points if you're eating something delicious while listening to this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and already feel behind. There's barley to pound, a donkey to chase, and the Nile hasn't flooded right in years. Your feet hit the packed dirt floor. It's cool now, but by mid-morning, the house will be hotter than Ra's armpit. You sigh. There's work to do. But first, you need to find food, if you can call it that. Food in ancient Egypt? Let's just say it had character. It wasn't all golden goblets and roasted oxen. Most people, like you, lived on a combination of whatever could be grown, caught, scavenged, fermented, or on desperate days imagined. The Nile was life, sure, but she was also moody. When she flooded, you feasted. When she didn't, you met hunger like an old, uninvited friend. Historians still argue whether the flooding patterns were getting worse during the later dynasties. But from where you're sitting, chewing on yesterday's dried onion husk, things are not trending upward. You step outside and squint into the harsh morning light. Your neighbor is already sweeping his doorway with a bundle of reeds. You nod a lazy greeting. His wife is pounding grain, her rhythmic strikes echoing down the street. Grain is the backbone of your world. Barley and emmer wheat, mostly, but not the fluffy, bake sale kind. You'll mash it, boil it, grind it, and bake it, but none of that guarantees taste. Or safety. You remember that time you got excited about a plump loaf, only to bite into it and chip a molar on a bit of embedded stone? That wasn't a fluke. It happens constantly. The millstones you use to grind flour shed little bits of quartz and grit into your dough. Over time, your teeth were down like chalk on limestone. Tooth pain? Normal. Dentists? Not a thing. Welcome is slow, crunchy doom. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you gotta eat something this morning. You rummage in your clay storage jar. There's a bit of flatbread, gone stale. You dunk it in a clay cup of beer, cloudy and warm. That's right, beer for breakfast. And not the fizzy kind. More like sludgy, sour porridge with a little fizz and a lot of floaters. A nice gritty sip to wash down your gritty loaf. Bon appetit. Some scholars suggest Egyptians actually liked this sour, chunky beer. Others think it was just the only safe liquid around, since boiling wasn't common and the Nile was a bacterial soup. Historians still argue whether beer was more meal than drink, and honestly, drinking it feels like chewing half your breakfast. You burp. Yep, the yeast is working. Down by the riverbank, the fishers are already tossing their nets. You consider joining them later. But last time, you caught something with too many eyes and a suspicious twitch. You cooked it anyway. Priorities. Oh, and remember how food is supposed to make you feel nourished? Not here. Here, it's more about not dying. You eat to not faint in the fields or drop your chisel in the tomb you're carving. You eat just enough to shovel more mud tomorrow. You take your breakfast outside and sit on the cool stoop. The morning light dances off the slowly moving Nile. A passing priest mutters a blessing as he walks by, and for a second, you think about the temples and the offerings. All that good food stacked up for the gods. Fat geese, jars of honey, fresh pomegranates. You're pretty sure they're not eating it up there. It just sits in the temples. Maybe you could borrow an offering sometime. Everyone knows it goes bad after a day anyway. Quirky fact. Some Egyptians use crocodile dung as a form of medicinal or cosmetic paste. Possibly even sunscreen. You're not sure if it works, but it sure keeps people away from you while you eat. Suddenly, your little brother runs by with a stolen onion. You pretend not to see. Your mom always says, if it's not nailed down and not your neighbor's child, it's fair game. You bite into your stale loaf and sigh. Today will be long, but at least you didn't wake up in the famine year when people boiled their sandals. You still have some standards. You glance over at the storage jars again. A rat tail disappears into one. Lovely. You make a mental note to patch the hole again. Maybe with some leftover plaster from the tomb work site. Tombs always seem to have better supplies. It's almost like the dead are eating better than you. You finish your meal and stand. Your stomach feels not full exactly, just quiet enough not to complain for the next hour. You stretch your back, already sore from sleeping on woven mats. The sun's rising, and with it the flies. A few land on the edge of your bread. You wave them off, then sigh and eat it anyway. Protein is protein. Tomorrow might bring better grain, or a fresh catch, or maybe the locusts will skip your village this time. Hope lives here, mostly because the alternative is despair. You grab your basket and start walking toward the fields. The day's work waits, and your stomach is doing its best impression of silence. For now, you trudge along the dusty path toward the grain storage hut, the sun already baking your linen wrap into your skin. As you walk, a few more people join you. Neighbors, cousins, that guy who might be your uncle, or maybe just owns a goat. Everyone's carrying something, baskets, sickles, that look of resigned exhaustion you all were like eyeliner. You're heading to the grinding room. Not the fun kind, either. You'll be making bread today, and that means flour. You duck into the cool gloom of a small mudbrick building and immediately sneeze. The air's thick with floating grain dust. You're not alone. Two other women are already hunched over grindstones, their hands moving rhythmically, like it's their 100th time today. It probably is. You kneel beside the saddle quern and start grinding. Emmer wheat. It's coarse and sticky, full of holes that refuse to cooperate. As you push the upper stone back and forth, the grain crushes beneath it with a gritty crunch that doesn't bode well for your molars. You already have a back tooth that feels like it's plotting against you. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were aware their bread was slowly destroying their teeth, or if they just chalked it up to being alive. Either way, you're feeling it. Every swipe of that stone sends another sprinkle of quartz, sand, and teeny bits of rock into what will eventually be dough. You wince. One bite of this bread is like chewing a brick, only the brick might have fewer calories. Bread is life in your world, not a side dish, not a starter. It is the meal. Round, flat loaves. Cone-shaped ones for the gods. Stale chunks you soak in beer. There's even funeral bread, carefully buried with the dead, as if even they wouldn't be caught dead without carbs. And yes, even the dead get fresher loaves than you do. You pour the gritty flour into a bowl and mix in some water. The result is a thick, paste-like dough. You glance over your shoulder for a quick moment of hope. Maybe there's honey or fruit for sweetening today. Nope, not unless you're willing to barter with the baker's wife and risk getting your ear boxed for flirting. Again, your hands work the dough, but your thoughts drift. Remember last spring, when your cousin brought back a piece of Levantine flatbread from a caravan. Soft, fragrant, even seasoned. You took one bite and cried a little. Not from emotion, your cracked molars hit a raisin. Luxury pain. Honestly worth it. There's a brief pause in the room as someone lights a fire in the clay oven. It flares up, crackling and smoking, and the temperature quickly shifts from desert sauna to volcano interior. You fan your face, wondering if the burns on your forearm from last week's baking have healed yet. You think they have, but everything itches now. Might be the heat, might be the flour mites, might be the existential weight of being a lower-class Egyptian in 1250 BCE. You pat your bread into a rough disc and slide it onto the oven side. It sticks there like a limp sunbather on a clay tanning bed. The smell is comforting, warm, earthy, and vaguely burnt. But comforting. You remind yourself not to get too excited. Once it cools, it'll be rock hard by mid-afternoon. Fun fact, some ancient loaves have been recovered from tombs, and even thousands of years later, they're still basically inedible. Even archaeologists aren't brave enough to bite them. Imagine a snack so dense it survives 30 centuries untouched. That's your lunch. You pull the bread from the oven with a crude paddle, the crust already hardening like a turtle shell. It's hot at least. You crack it open and steam escapes. You tear off a piece, blow on it, and crunch your way through the first bite. It tastes like flour and hope, with an aftertaste of gravel. You chew slowly, then stop chewing when you hit something too crunchy. You pretend it's a grain of salt. It's not. Outside, the children are playing with reed balls. One of them trips, lands face first in the dust, and comes up laughing with a piece of flatbread stuck to his forehead. A snack in a bandage, multi-purpose cuisine. You look down at your loaf and sigh. At least it's not moving. This time, historians still argue whether the majority of people in ancient Egypt ate mostly home-baked bread or if village ovens did most of the baking. But for you, it doesn't matter. Whether it's baked by your hand or the neighbors, it's all made from the same rock-filled flour and shaped with the same sore fingers. Sometimes, if you're lucky or bribing someone, you get flavored bread. Seeds, maybe. Coriander, if someone's cousin smuggled it in. The occasional fruit mush, mashed and smeared over the dough. That's reserved for festival days. You haven't seen a festival in months. Your jaw aches by the third bite. You're not even hungry anymore, just chewing for the calories. You fold the rest into a scrap of cloth and stuff it into your belt. It'll be tougher by lunch, but you'll still eat it. You always do. What choice do you have? As you step back outside, the sun slams into your face like a judgmental god. You squint across the village and see someone chasing a goat with a stick, probably trying to keep it out of the grain bins. You smile grimly. That goat eats better than most people you know. You carry your bread toward the fields, but your thoughts drift again. You wonder how the rich eat, those priests and bureaucrats in Thebes. Do their loaves crunch? Do their ovens burn their hands? Do their teeth fall out before 30? Maybe not, but at least they have ointments and servants and probably fewer weevils in their flour. Back at the riverbank, you pass a man arguing with a scribe over how many loaves he owes in tax. The scribe looks bored, twirling his reed pen. The man looks hungry. You wonder if he'll end up giving away the loaf you just watched him bake. Probably. Grain tax doesn't care if your children are crying. The gods need their cut, after all. You take one more bite, then stuff the bread back into the cloth. A piece of it breaks off and falls into the dirt. You bend to pick it up. Yes, you're going to eat that. Of course you are. You spit out a bit of gravel, wipe your mouth, and keep walking. It's another day in ancient Egypt, and your bread is still the worst part of it. You're still picking stone grit out of your molars when you make it back to the shaded courtyard, where the beer jars sit in the cool of the wall shadow. You're parched. The desert air is like breathing through hot wool, and the bread in your belly feels like it's forming sediment layers. You need something to wash it down. So you reach for the big, round beer jar, your breakfast companion, lunch refreshment, and evening entertainment all in one. It's sealed with a scrap of cloth and a blob of dried mud. You crack it open. A low pop, then a sour, warm puff of yeasty air hits your face. You brace yourself, take a sip, and yeah, still gross. Beer in ancient Egypt isn't the kind of thing you raise in a chilled glass after a long day. It's more like barley porridge someone forgot in the sun. Thick, sludgy, fermented to the point of confusion. Historians still argue whether it was intentionally chunky or if people just accepted that chewing your drink was part of the experience. You swirl it around the jar, hoping the froth settles a little. No such luck. Bits of mash float to the top. You drink it anyway. Egyptians love their beer. Not in a party way. Although, yes, parties did get very beer forward, but as a daily, necessary part of life. The water's unreliable and usually swarming with things that don't pair well with digestion. So beer becomes your hydration, your calories, your nutrient source. It's like soup, but worse. You remember stories of workers at the pyramids getting paid in beer. 4 jars a day, which sounds amazing until you realize those jars are filled with something that looks like broth left under a bed. In summer. Fun fact, some ancient Egyptian beer jars still contain residue. When archaeologists tested it, they found yeast strains that survived for thousands of years. So yes, your drink could technically outlive a dynasty. You sip carefully. That tangy flavor could be fermentation, could be mold, could be regret. You glance at your neighbor, who's tipping back his jar like it's a reward. He catches your eye and grins, revealing 2 brown, chipped teeth. Good batch today, he says. You're not sure if he's joking. Sometimes, festivals bring slightly better beer. Stronger, more refined, with added herbs or honey. But that's rare. Mostly, it's barley mashed into a slurry, left to sit, then strained-ish. The result is a drink that's nutritious in theory and suspicious in execution. You wonder how the nobles drink theirs. Probably from gold cups with little reed straws, while musicians pluck lyres and fan them with ostrich feathers. You, meanwhile, have a clay mug that leaks and smells faintly of dead fish. That's not even an exaggeration. You're pretty sure someone used this jar to store cat bait last week. Historians are still debating the exact brewing process. Some believe it involved half-baked bread crumbled into warm water to start fermentation. Others think they let raw grains sprout first. Either way, you're drinking something halfway between a smoothie and a dare. A fly lands on the rim. You wave it off, then flick something floating in the foam. You hope it's barley. It might not be. You take another swig, then sit back with a burp that brings up last week's onions. The sun has moved higher, the air buzzes with insects, and you're officially buzzed. Not drunk exactly, just beer happy. It numbs your jaw, helps you forget the grit in your bread and the smell of goat urine baked into your sandals. Quirky tidbit, there was a goddess of beer, Tenenet. That's how seriously Egyptians took this drink. And honestly, she deserves a holiday. Without her, half the population would have dehydrated or starved. Beer, because clean water is a rumor and solid food, is an exercise in dentistry. You pass your mug to your cousin, who chugs it like he's competing in a lost Olympic event. Tastes better than last week, he says, wiping his mouth. You nod politely. Last week's batch had a faint ammonia flavor. No one asks questions. Someone from the temple walks by, robe spotless, nose turned up. He doesn't even glance at the beer jars. You know the priests get wine. Actual wine. Grapes grown in private gardens, crushed in clean presses, aged in shaded cellars. You had wine once. 2 sips. It was like drinking sunlight. You still dream about it. Instead, you take another gulp of yeasty goo. You imagine it coating your stomach like a weak cement mix. Honestly, it's probably better than nothing. Some days, it's the only reason your legs keep working. You head back to your mat to rest a bit before afternoon work. Beer buzz humming in your head, you lie down, thinking about how something so unpleasant became so essential. But it makes sense. It's liquid bread. It fills you up. It doesn't kill you, usually. And after a few jars, even your stale loaf seems vaguely tolerable. You stare at the ceiling and let the haze take over. You've got more due today, but right now, the world is quiet. Well, except for your neighbor's donkey, who sounds like he's dying every time he brays. Maybe he had too much beer, too. You roll over, cradle your half-empty jar, and think at least it's coldish. That's something. You wake from your beer nap to the smell of something that could either be dinner or disaster. Your nose twitches. It's meat, sort of. Maybe. You're not sure. You sit up, still groggy, and follow the scent. It's coming from the neighbor's courtyard, where a clay oven smokes suspiciously and flies are throwing a house party. Meat in ancient Egypt isn't something you get often, unless you're friends with a butcher, a priest, or a very unlucky cow. You peek over the low wall and spot what looks like a roasted goose, except it's the color of old papyrus and smells faintly of swamp. Your neighbor waves you over. It's fresh, he lies. You sit. He carves off a hunk, and you stare at it. Tough, dry, stringy. You gnaw a bite and immediately regret it. The texture is somewhere between sandal leather and driftwood. And the flavor? Imagine if smoke and pond water had a baby. Here's the thing. Meat was rare for most Egyptians. For the poor, it was an occasional treat, a ceremonial offering, or the result of a lucky scavenging opportunity. Maybe a goat died of natural causes. Maybe a duck flew into the wrong net. Maybe a priest looked away for 2 seconds and oops, that beef rib ended up in your stew. Happens all the time. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian ate meat weekly, monthly, or just on special holidays. Your teeth say barely ever. When meat does show up, it's often old, full of bones or suspiciously gray. If it's a good cut, you're probably not meant to have it. You chew slowly. It's gamey. Is it duck? Dog? You stop asking questions. There's no label here, only texture and trust. Quirky fact, some meats were preserved with honey and salt, like proto-jerky. In theory, that makes them last longer. In practice, it just means it takes longer to realize it went bad. Your neighbor offers another piece. This one's better, he says. He's lying again, but you're hungry. You think of the temple sacrifices, the fattened cattle, the geese with fig-stuffed bellies. All of it piled high in smoky grandeur before gilded statues. The gods get the best cuts, then the priests. Then maybe, if you're very lucky, scraps trickle down into your stew pot. But most days, your meat is leftovers from the gods or the graveyard. One time, you got a piece of wild boar during a festival. It was marinated in date syrup and grilled with garlic. You dreamed about it for weeks. It was the first time you considered crying over a meal. Now, you're gnawing on something with more sinew than flavor, watching flies crawl across the plate. You wave them away and keep chewing. Your stomach might complain later, but for now, your body says thank you. Remember that smell? The one that lured you here? It's stronger now. Someone across the street is boiling something questionable. The aroma floats over. Meat stew, maybe, or fermented fish. Hard to tell from this distance. You feel both hungry and mildly ill. You ask your neighbor where he got this bird. He shrugs, traded a jar of beer for it, said it was fresh. You nod. That's vague enough to be true. Fresh often just means not obviously dead when purchased. The rest is up to interpretation. The sun's getting low. Shadows stretch across the village like lazy cats. You and your neighbor sit in silence, working your way through the chewy feast. There's something almost peaceful about it, even if your jaw feels like it's doing push-ups. You remember a fringe story a traveler once told, of a land beyond the Sinai, where meat is soft and falls apart with a spoon, where people fatten animals just for flavor. You laughed at the time. Now, you kind of want to believe it's true. Suddenly, a kid runs by holding something dripping. Fresh fish, he yells. You exchange a glance with your neighbor. Dinner. Round 2? Why not? You rise, joints creaking, stomach cautiously optimistic. But as you chase after the boy, you glance back at the half-eaten meat on the plate. It's starting to attract beetles. You leave it. You've had enough flavor for one day, assuming that was flavor. You follow the barefoot blur of the fish boy down to the riverbank, weaving through reed baskets, grazing goats, and one elderly woman yelling at a clay pot like it owes her money. The Nile lies ahead, wide and glimmering in the late light, as if it isn't hiding 1,000 secrets under its murky surface, including your dinner. The boy stops at a rough wooden table, already swarmed by a small crowd. You join the gathering and squint at the day's catch. Several fish lie twitching in the heat. Tilapia, catfish, and something that might once have had scales but now mostly resembles a damp shoe. You lean in closer. The smell hits you like an open grave filled with brine and regret. Ah yes, fresh. You poke one with your finger. It's warm, not just cooked warm, left on a rock too long warm. Still, beggars can't be choosers, and choosers can't afford tilapia. You haggle with the fish boy, offer him a handful of lentils and a crust of bread. He hesitates, then nods. Barter accepted. You now own a fish that may or may not be decomposing as you hold it. Historians still argue whether most ancient Egyptians ate fresh fish regularly or if dried and salted varieties were the norm. From your experience, anything not swimming in parasites is considered a delicacy. You tuck the fish into your cloth pouch, feeling it leak slightly. EW, you need to cook it fast. You head to the nearby fire pit behind your home, dodging the neighbor's donkey, which has taken a deep personal interest in your dinner. You gut the fish with a dull flint shard, working quickly. No spices, no lemon, no little sprigs of green, just fire and hope. The fish's guts spill out with a slurp that makes your stomach lurch. You toss the innards to a waiting cat, who snatches them like it's been waiting its whole life for this moment. As you roast the fish over open flame, the smell gets slightly better. Slightly. It hisses and pops, its eyes bulging like it knows something you don't. The skin curls, revealing the soft, flaky interior. You prod it with a stick. Done enough. Probably. Quirky fact. Some Egyptians believed eating certain fish offended the gods, especially the ones associated with the Nile or sacred animals. So depending on which region you're in, this fish might be food or blasphemy. You decide not to ask. You sit cross-legged in the dirt and dig in, pulling flakes away from bone. It's tender in the middle, if a little rubbery on the edges. You savor each bite. Salty, oily, not entirely unpleasant. There's definitely a hint of river mud, but at least it's not more stale bread. Halfway through, you hit a surprise, a small parasite wriggling near the spine. You pause, then flick it into the fire with zero ceremony. It sizzles. You keep eating. What's one more worm when your stomach's already hosting a microcosm of bacteria? You remember the time your cousin ate raw fish during a festival dare. He spent 3 days moaning in the corner, sweating like a pig, and whispering apologies to Osiris. Lesson learned. Cook it. Or, if you can't cook it, at least pray first. You finish the fish and wipe your greasy fingers on your tunic. A few bones stick between your teeth. You pick them out with a splintered reed and spit them into the fire. You lean back, satisfied for the first time today. No chewing rocks, no beer sludge, just soft, warm protein. You watch the Nile flow by in its lazy, powerful way. It's given you food, kind of, but it also gives you disease, crocodiles, and the occasional drowned cow. It's a love-hate relationship. More hate today. A group of fishermen pass by hauling nets. They wave, tired and sunburned, their boat dragging something large and mysterious. Probably a catfish, possibly a river spirit. You nod in respect. Historians still puzzle over the Egyptian relationship with fish. In tomb paintings, fishermen appear often, but so do images of fish being rejected in temple rituals. It's like everyone wanted fish, but no one wanted to admit they were eating it. Except you. You'll admit it. You're full, finally. You don't even care if it was taboo. You pick your teeth with another reed and stand, belly heavy. The sky is dimming. Flies buzz lazily around your fire pit, and a dog sniffs the ashes with interest. You nudge it away. Sorry, pal. Nothing left. As you wash your hand with a splash of Nile water. Yes, you're aware that's possibly worse than not washing. You reflect on the strangeness of it all. Fish is everywhere, but somehow it still feels like a gamble. Will it fill you up, or put you in a fever dream for 2 days? You'll find out tomorrow. Your stomach's full of fish and caution, but it's not enough to get you through tomorrow. You'll need more food, vegetables ideally. So, once the sun stretches low across the sky, you make your way toward the small garden plot behind your home, if you can call a garden. It's more of a hopeful rectangle of dirt with commitment issues. The soil is dry, cracked, and baked into patterns that resemble crocodile skin. You splash a little ditch water along the furrows. It vanishes instantly, like the earth itself is thirsty enough to sip it before your leeks can. Still, you crouch down and start checking what's grown since your last check, 2 days ago. Not much. A few limp onion stalks, a single garlic bulb that's more wishful than edible, and one particularly brave cucumber vine that seems to be doing better than expected. You give it a small nod of encouragement. You'll name it later if it survives the week. Vegetables in ancient Egypt are not optional luxuries. They're survival. They grow faster than grains, don't require quite as much land, and, if you're lucky, might even taste like something. Leeks, garlic, radishes, cucumbers, onions, and lentils are your go-to staples. Not exactly glamorous, but at least they don't grind your teeth down to ancient nubs. You tug gently at a half-grown leek. It resists. You pull harder. It comes loose with a wet pop and an alarming amount of dirt still clinging to its roots. You give it a sniff. Earthy, pungent, kind of comforting if you ignore the fact that it'll make your breath smell like you've been arguing with a mummy. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian vegetable plots were consistently productive or dangerously vulnerable to local climate shifts. You know where you stand. If the Nile floods right and the gods are in a good mood, you get greens. If not, it's just bread and bitterness. You dig up a few more onions and toss them into your gathering basket. There's also a pile of lentils drying on a woven mat near the back door. You flip the mat to keep the bugs off and wave away a lizard who's taken interest. These lentils will probably be tomorrow's stew base, assuming the pot hasn't cracked again. Last week you tried to cook lentils and ended up with pottery soup. Not your proudest moment. You remember that weird little recipe your grandmother swore by. Garlic, crushed radish, date syrup, and fermented leeks, all mashed into a kind of spicy paste. You tried it once. It made your mouth burn and your eyes water, and somehow you still wanted more. The paste had zing. It also made your uncle sweat through 3 tunics and insist he could see the falcon god in the clouds. You're still not sure if that was the spices or the heat stroke. Quirky fact: garlic was so valued, it was even used as wages for pyramid workers. Imagine building a tomb for a divine pharaoh and getting paid in tiny, smelly bulbs. Truly a union negotiation for the ages. You rinse your hands with more ditch water, even though it's probably hosting half a school of mosquito larvae. Then you head inside to clean the vegetables. Not scrub clean, obviously, you're not a priest. Just a casual dusting and a quick flick to remove the obvious bits of beetle. You slice the leeks thin and toss them in a clay pan with a little oil, pressed from flaxseed, because olive trees don't exactly thrive in your neighborhood. The vegetables sizzle gently, and you stir them with a charred stick. You add a handful of lentils, some onion, and a splash of sour beer, because that's your closest thing to broth. A bubble rises, pops, and releases a smell that's not unpleasant. Kind of savory, kind of footy. You call that character. You glance out the window and notice smoke from a nearby house. Someone else is cooking onions, too. The air between your homes smells like a very tired soup festival. You finish the stew and let it sit while you tear up some flatbread to soak in the bowl. You chew slowly. The bread softens a little, the lentils are mushy, and the leeks give everything a pungent kick. You're not smiling exactly, but you're definitely not frowning. That's high praise. Historians still debate how varied the average Egyptian diet really was. Tomb paintings show a wide array of produce: lettuce, melons, grapes, beans, but how much of that was daily reality versus divine propaganda? For you, variety means having both onion and leek in the same bowl. Luxury: you slurp the last bit of stew and lean back, full enough to sigh. It's not a feast, but it's better than gnawing on yesterday's hard bread or praying your fish isn't haunted. As the night creeps in, you gather up the leftover vegetables and store them in a sealed jar. It's not airtight, nothing really is, but it'll keep out most of the bugs and hopefully your brother. He has a way of sniffing out cooked lentils from across the village. You stretch your legs, listen to the frogs by the river start up their nighttime concert, and rub your stomach thoughtfully. Not bad. Your jaw doesn't ache. Your teeth are still intact, and nothing is crawling out of the pot. You take your wins where you can. Tomorrow, if the gods are kind, your cucumber vine will finally bloom. If not, well, back to leeks and dreams. You wake to the sound of buzzing, thick, persistent, and just a little too close to your ear. At first, you think it's a dream. Then you open your eyes and see 3 wasps having a heated debate over the fig you left on the windowsill. Great! Breakfast has been claimed by insects. Again, you sit up and shoo them away with a linen scrap. One buzzes angrily and loops back for another pass before finally giving up. You retrieve the fig, now slightly bruised and sticky. It's warm, soft, and surprisingly still edible. You take a bite. Sweetness floods your tongue. It's one of the rare pleasures in this dusty world, even if the inside of the fig has a squishy texture that makes you pause. You try not to think about the ancient Egyptian rumor that figs sometimes grow worms on the inside. True? Maybe. Does it stop you? Not today. Fruit in your world is a gamble. On good days, it's honey sweet and juicy. On bad days, it's fermented, half-rotten, and suspiciously alive. Figs, dates, grapes, and dom pom fruit make up most of your fruity options, if you can find them before the beetles do. You wipe your hands and inspect the storage basket near the doorway. You've got a few more figs, slightly wrinkled dates, and something that may have once been a pomegranate, but now looks like it lost a fight with time. You pick it up, shake it gently, and hear a dull rattle inside. Seeds? Or bugs? You set it down. Not worth the risk this early in the day. Historians still argue whether fruit was common across all classes or mostly reserved for the upper tiers of Egyptian society. The wall paintings make it look like fruit flowed as freely as beer. But in your experience, unless you're a scribe or a temple servant with access to offerings, fruit is a seasonal treat or a fleeting temptation. You bite into a date next. It's sticky and sweet with a slight tang. That means it's fermented just a little, which some people love. You're on the fence. You chew slowly, savoring the sugars, and try not to think about how many ants were probably crawling over it last night. Quirky fact, ancient Egyptians didn't just eat dates. They mashed them into syrup, fermented them into booze, and sometimes even used them as medicine. In other words, dates are the Swiss Army knife of fruit. Snack, sweetener, stomach remedy, and potential cause of regret. You wrap the remaining fruit in a linen pouch and stash it near your bed, hopefully out of reach from the local six-legged population. Then you head out to the small fruit grove near the edge of the village. It's not yours, technically, but if you happen to walk by when something falls, that's just good timing, not stealing, right? The grove is already bustling. Kids climb trees, adults stand around looking innocent, and one man is actively arguing with a monkey over a piece of melon. You join the chaos and scout the ground for fallen treasures. A grape cluster, half squished. A dom pom nut, rock hard, but edible if you soak it long enough. You pocket both. Then you spot it, a full, unbruised fig lying in a patch of shade. You approach slowly, like it's going to sprout legs and run. You reach down, and something moves. A beetle, big and shiny, crawling out from underneath. You both freeze. It stares. You stare. Then you politely let it have the figure. It's just not worth the energy. You settle for a handful of semi-dried grapes instead. You pop one in your mouth. It's shriveled, tough, and surprisingly tart. Almost like a raisin that forgot how to be cheerful. A shout rings out from the far end of the grove. Someone's found a cluster of near-ripe pomegranates. You join the crowd. The fruit is red, round, and gloriously plump, but hanging just out of reach. A boy tries to climb the tree, but slips and lands on his back, laughing. Someone else throws a rock. It misses and hits a passerby who is not laughing. You watch the chaos unfold, then quietly grab one of the dislodged fruits that rolled your way. It's split down the side, revealing those bright ruby seeds. You tear it open and pop a few into your mouth. The juice bursts sweet and tangy, staining your fingers instantly. You suck the juice from your fingertips like it's honey. Historians still puzzle over whether ancient Egyptians had ways to preserve fruits long term. There's some evidence of drying, and honey-preserved fruit was a thing for the wealthy. For you, preservation means eat it before the ants do. With your makeshift harvest in hand, you head back toward home, licking juice off your hands and try not to step on any more opportunistic beetles. You spot your little brother with cheeks full of something suspiciously red and sticky. He's grinning. He's also covered in jam-like splatter. You don't ask questions. You're just glad he's eating something that isn't mud again. Back home, you lay out your haul. A few grapes, some dried dates, a palm nut, and that busted pomegranate. It's not a feast, but it's colorful. You mash the dates with a stone, add a bit of beer, and call it sauce. You smear it on bread. It's weird, but not bad. Later, you sit by the river with what's left of your fruit stash. letting the last of the sun warm your face. The air smells like silt, sweet rot, and hope. You eat one last fig, close your eyes, and ignore the crunch of a seed, or maybe a tiny leg. Sweet dreams. You wake the next morning with your mouth dry, and your tongue tasting vaguely of pomegranate and regret. The last fig didn't sit right. Either that or the beetle leg finally caught up with you. You groan and roll to your feet, heading for the pantry corner to find something, anything, to spice up the inevitable bread stew waiting in your future. Spices. Flavor. Taste that doesn't scream wheat paste. You long for them like lost treasure. But in ancient Egypt, flavor was a complicated affair. Most of what you've got is mud adjacent, bland, or sour. You sift through your jars, salt, maybe, possibly crushed coriander, a crumb of fenugreek if you're blessed. But otherwise, not much to work with. You pop open the first jar. Just salt. You taste a pinch. Yep, that's salt all right. Grainy, damp, and slightly smoky from being stored next to the fire pit. It'll have to do. You scrape some out and mix it into your morning lentil mash. It's an improvement, slightly less like licking a burnt rock. Flavor is precious in your world, not just because it makes the food taste better, but because it feels like a tiny luxury. And when life is heat stroke, biting gnats, and slow-cooked dental failure, tiny luxuries matter. Historians still argue how widespread spice use actually was in everyday Egyptian kitchens. Evidence points to garlic, coriander, cumin, fenugreek, dill, and occasionally imported cinnamon or pepper. But unless you're living large in a Theban villa, chances are your spice rack is a row of clay jars filled mostly with dreams and dust. You find a shriveled bit of what might be dried mint. You crush it between your fingers. It smells faintly fresh, herbal, earthy. You toss it into the stew for morale more than flavor. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians sometimes used ground myrrh or frankincense in cooking, not just in religious ceremonies. You tried it once. Tasted like spicy tree bark and instantly made you question your life choices. That jar now lives in your emergency pile next to the half-broken beer jug and the cricket collection. You remember the time your cousin came back from a trip up north bragging about pepper. Actual, real pepper. Black, aromatic, and so expensive that he wore the pouch like jewelry. He let you sniff it once. You almost cried. Now, as you stir your mush, you think about what it would be like to eat a stew with layers of flavor. Heat, depth, something that doesn't just taste like boiled. Instead, you've got salty mush with a hint of onion and existential disappointment. Bon appétit. You sit on your stoop, eating slowly as the village stirs awake. A neighbor walks by chewing on a strip of dried radish, his eyes half closed. Another one is pounding garlic in a stone mortar, and the smell wafts through the street like a divine blessing. You close your eyes and breathe it in. Garlic, at least, you have. It's strong, it's spicy, and it makes your breath capable of killing flies at 10 paces. But it tastes like something. You remember the funerary offering jars you saw once in a noble's tomb. Spiced meats, honey-glazed breads, jars of perfumed oil, and tiny packets of saffron. That person was going into the afterlife with a better lunch than you've had all year. You finish your stew and wipe the bowl with your last hunk of bread. It softens just enough to chew without crying. The mint hits your tongue like a faint breeze through a tomb. Refreshing, weirdly unsettling, and probably not strong enough to matter. You glance around your storage area again, hoping for forgotten flavor. Instead, you find an ancient jar of something dark. Sticky. Smells like fermented despair. You sniff it, recoil, and close the lid quickly. You're pretty sure it was once tamarisk paste, or maybe a potion to summon demons. Either way, not today. Outside, the merchant cart rattles past, pulled by a grumpy-looking donkey and a much grumpier man. You call out and ask if he has spices. He laughs and throws you a small sack. You catch it, open it, and find sand, actual sand. Imported, he calls. You roll your eyes and toss it back. Typical. You sigh, glance at the empty bowl in your hands, and wonder if the gods ever eat bland food. Surely not. They get honey and lotus petals and wild herbs from Nubia. You get coriander if you're lucky, And if your brother hasn't snuck off with a jar again to try and flavor his sandals, you find a few more flavor scraps, a pinch of dry dill, some crushed mustard seed from a trade last month, and tuck them away in a tighter jar. Tomorrow, maybe you'll use them, or maybe you'll just dream about cinnamon again. At least the salt is still holding up. Salt, the true MVP of the Egyptian pantry. Used to dry fish, preserve meat, season stew, treat wounds, and probably fix broken relationships if you rub it in hard enough. You head out to the riverbank again, bread in one hand and spiced dreams in the other. The sun is already glaring. The Nile glistens like it's mocking you. You chew on your leftover loaf and pretend it has flavor. You tell yourself it does. That's the trick, really. Flavor, in your world, is mostly imagination. But imagination, thankfully, is something you haven't run out of. By midday, the sun is bearing down like it has a personal grudge against your skin. Your mouth is dry again, and your stomach's making that hollow drum sound it does when it's not thrilled with your dietary choices, especially the fermented date mint stew you bravely called lunch. It's time to look for something with actual substance. Protein. But you already ate your fish catch yesterday. And no, you're not trying that dry jerky again. You remember too, well, how it crumbled into dust mid-bite and nearly choked you with disappointment. So now, with a growling belly and cautious optimism, you begin the protein hunt. You duck into a neighbor's courtyard where chickens strut like they own the place. One side eyes you. It knows. You've got your eye on its plumpest cousin. But you also know meat is rarely on the menu, especially not fresh, feathered meat. Killing a chicken is a big deal here. You don't just pluck and roast on a whim. Historians still argue whether the average ancient Egyptian consumed meat regularly, or whether it was more reserved for feasts, offerings, and the occasional "we're blessed to be eating this" moments. Judging from your daily struggle, you lean toward the latter. You sigh and move along. There's another source of protein, less noble, more abundant. You find your little brother near a tree, gleefully poking at a writhing cluster of something on a leaf. Bugs. The protein you don't talk about, but absolutely rely on when times are rough. Locusts, beetles, grubs, fried, sun-dried, mashed into cakes. High in protein, low in dignity. He offers you a fat beetle like it's a prize treat. You consider it. It's shiny, wiggles, crunchy when roasted. You thank him, pocket it, and decide to collect a few more. Not because you want to eat bugs, but because dinner can't just be flavored air. Quirky fact, certain beetles in ancient Egypt were considered sacred, especially scarabs. But that didn't stop hungry folks from roasting the non-sacred varieties when times got tough. You wouldn't touch a scarab, though. That's how curses happen, and you're not trying to wake up with boils and indigestion. You skulk around the village edges, gathering what you can. A few grasshoppers, a scorpion you wisely let go, you're not that desperate, and a couple of larvae hiding in date pits. You mentally rank them from might taste nutty to will haunt your dreams. Back home, you toss the beetles into your clay pan with a splash of oil. They sizzle. The smell? Not terrible. Kind of like burning leaves and peanut shells. You had a pinch of that dried coriander you found earlier. It's suddenly starting to feel like a real dish. Historians still puzzle over how bug consumption was viewed socially. Was it survival food, common protein, or just something nobody wanted to write down? You can't help but notice how tomb paintings never show someone gleefully snacking on a roasted cricket. Probably too undignified for the afterlife. Your pan now holds 6 lightly charred beetles and 2 overcooked grasshoppers. You slide them onto a scrap of bread and take a tentative bite. Crunchy, smoky, weirdly satisfying. The coriander helps. A little. You remember that time your aunt made locust stew during a famine year. Everyone gagged until they realized it was the only warm food around. After that, it became traditional cuisine. Funny how survival rebrands things. You polish off your insect toast and lean back. Try not to dwell on the texture. You rinse your mouth with water and realize, hey, you're not hungry anymore. And no bread today. Try to break your teeth. Victory. Then your cousin walks in, holding a long, slender bundle wrapped in linen. A fish? You ask. He grins and unwraps it like it's a royal offering. It's a rat. roasted, skinned, and very much dead. You freeze. He insists it's good eating. Lots of people do it. You think about it. He's not wrong. Small rodents were eaten in ancient Egypt, especially when other meat wasn't an option. They'd catch field rats, clean them, roast them on skewers. No one liked it, but it worked. You stare at the crispy tail, then decline politely. There's only so far you're willing to go for protein, and you already maxed out your courage on beetles. Your cousin shrugs and digs in, chomping happily as if it's duck confit. You can't help but laugh. This is your world. Bugs, occasional rodents, fish with questionable freshness, and a once-in-a-lifetime chicken dinner. You dream of roasted lamb, but that's for temple feasts or high officials. Not someone whose biggest protein score this week was a grasshopper and a half. Still, you don't go to bed hungry tonight. You have bug belly. It's not glamorous, but it's full. Later, you stretch out on your mat, thinking of tomorrow's meals. Maybe you'll try for another fish. Maybe barter for some eggs. Maybe a goat will wander into the village and look at you funny, and that'll be the sign. Who knows? But tonight, you rest, full of six-legged success and lightly toasted dignity. The night is warm, and your dreams are strange, probably something to do with the coriander beetles. And when you wake, it's to the low hum of voices and the distant bray of a donkey losing an argument. You sit up, groggy, and realize it's market day. You stretch, shake yesterday's crumbs from your tunic, and grab your worn satchel. If you're going to get anything worth chewing this week, it'll have to happen now. The market isn't exactly a food paradise. It's more of a dusty rectangle where people yell at each other over withered onions and suspicious cheese, but it's better than nothing. As you trudge along the main path, you think about what you might trade. A few lengths of woven reed mat, maybe some leftover dried fish bits, and if you're feeling brave, one of your mother's carved ivory combs. That's your heavy hitter. Trade that, and you better come home with something you can chew without breaking a molar. The market comes into view, clay stalls, shaded by fraying linens, all buzzing with people haggling like their lives depend on it. And in many cases, they probably do. You make your way to the food section, hoping for something exciting, or at least not moldy. Historians still argue over how accessible market food was to regular folks. Some believe local markets offered a wide range of fresh produce, meats, and imports, even for commoners. Others suggest the best stuff was always snapped up by temple officials or the wealthy, leaving everyone else with crumbs, bones, and secondhand radishes. You know where you stand. Food here is a gamble. You pass a fishmonger first. The smell hits you before you even see his stall. His display features a few Nile perch, already half-flies. One has an eyeball missing. Another is sun-baked to the consistency of jerky. You raise your eyebrows, and he offers you a discount. You keep walking. Next stall, dates. Sweet, sticky, and allegedly fresh. You poke one. It squishes a bit too easily. The vendor glares at you. You smile, offer him your dried fish bits. He laughs as though you offer to pay with belly button lint. Fine. You press on. Then comes the import table, and you have to use that term loosely. Here, a proud merchant displays a cracked jar of sesame paste, some almost oil olives, and something in a linen-wrapped bundle that he insists is cinnamon. You ask to smell it. He says no. Suspicious. You manage to barter a small handful of lentils from a woman with sharp elbows and sharper pricing. You trade her a bit of matting and one of your beetle shell necklaces. A fair trade, even if the lentils are more pebbly than you'd like. Then you reach the cheese man. Now, cheese in ancient Egypt is a conversation. It's not cheddar. It's not creamy. It's often somewhere between salted curd and what happens when milk gives up on life. Today's offering is no different. You take a sample from the edge. It's hard, sour, sharp enough to use as a weapon. Still, you ask the price. You want your ivory comb. You pause. That's steep, but protein, salt, tang, a chance to eat something that isn't mush or bug-based. You sigh and hand over the comb. He grins and drops the cheese into a palm leaf for you. You cradle it like it's treasure and vow to make it last more than a day. It won't, but it's nice to pretend. Quirky fact. Ancient Egyptian cheese was sometimes stored in clay jars and left to ferment. One 3,200-year-old tomb cheese found by archaeologists tested positive for Brucella bacteria, meaning the person who ate it likely had a very unfortunate bathroom experience shortly afterward. You try not to think about that as you sniff your own wedge. With the market winding down and your satchel slightly heavier, you meander back home. On the way, you pass a noble's estate. You catch a glimpse of a servant carrying a tray of figs, melons, and what you think is roast duck. For a moment, your soul leaves your body. You also spot what looks like honey, real honey, glistening and golden, probably imported from somewhere fancy, or collected from bees by someone braver than you. Once you try to raid a wild hive, you spent the next day submerged in a jar of cooling mud and self-pity. Historians still puzzle over how much of the lavish ancient feasts shown in tomb art were real versus idealized. One thing's for sure, you're not invited to those feasts. Your food budget doesn't include duck, honey, or ceremonial bread shaped like lotus flowers. Back at home, you sit cross-legged with your haul. Lentils, the blessed cheese, and one slightly less squishy date you managed to smuggle when the vendor wasn't looking. You mash the lentils with some water, sprinkle in a pinch of salt, and stir until it becomes that familiar paste. Then, carefully, reverently, you shave a tiny sliver of cheese and lay it on top. You take a bite. It's tangy, sharp, salty, and, bless the gods, it melts slightly on your tongue. You actually close your eyes for a second. It's that good. Or maybe it's just that everything else you eat usually tastes like wet pottery. You save the rest of the cheese in a sealed pot, stuffing the opening with rags to keep it cool. You write "do not touch" on the lid in charcoal. You add an angry face for good measure. Outside, the sun begins to dip behind the horizon, casting everything in gold. You lie back, full enough to be content, and stare at the sky. Food's not always easy here. In fact, it almost never is. But sometimes, just sometimes, you trade the right thing at the right time, and it actually pays off, even if it cost your best comb. You wake before dawn, the sky still a hazy gray and the air surprisingly cool. For a moment, it feels like anything's possible. Then your stomach growls, and reality snaps back like a taut sling. You rub your eyes and think, it's bread day, not the stale, rock-hard chunks you've been gnawing on all week. Today, you're going to bake something new, well, newish. A fresh loaf, if the gods smile on you. You've been saving a small pouch of barley flour for this very reason, stashing it away from rodents, relatives, and especially your cousin, who once mistook it for bath powder. You light your fire, careful and patient, coaxing it with dry reeds and muttered promises. Once it catches, you feel like a magician. You warm a stone slab over the flames, then mix the flour with water in your favorite bowl, the one without too many cracks. The dough is lumpy, uneven, stubborn. You knead it with determination and a fair amount of scowling, adding a pinch of salt and a sprinkle of wild herbs you forage from the edge of the village. They smell vaguely like mint and possibly feet, but it's flavor, and you're not complaining. You shape the loaf by hand, flattening it like a thick disc. It's not symmetrical, and there's a weird lump on one side that might be a beetle leg. You remove it and carry on. Into the fire it goes. Historians still argue over how ancient Egyptian bread was leavened. Some say sourdough starters were common. Others believe most breads were flat and dense, more like edible stones than the fluffy loaves we picture today. You have no yeast, and your idea of rising dough is more hopeful than practical. You watch the bread puff slightly around the edges. Steam rises, smelling earthy and slightly sour. You feel weirdly proud. This is craftsmanship. A meal you actually made, not just scavenged. Then the neighbor's dog appears, staring at your bread with the soulful eyes of someone who's known hunger. You hiss and wave it away. Not today, buddy. Today, this loaf is yours. While the bread cools, you nibble on a few leftover lentils, the ones that didn't turn into gray paste. Then, carefully, reverently, you tear off a piece of your bread and taste it. It's chewy, a little smoky, definitely denser than you'd like, but warm and satisfying. You close your eyes and imagine you're in a noble's estate, surrounded by baskets of warm rolls, dipping them into honey and butter. Quirky fact, Some bread loaves found in tombs were so full of sand from poorly milled flour that they likely wore down people's teeth faster than time ever could. You feel every grain as your own loaf crunches between your molars, and you're suddenly aware that dentistry isn't exactly booming around here. You finish half the loaf and tuck the rest away for lunch. You're full, for now, and that's a rare feeling. Later in the day, you help your neighbor with her chores in exchange for a cup of goat milk. It's thin, a little grassy, but it washes down the lingering dryness of your bread nicely. She mentions she might be making beer bread next week. You raise an eyebrow. She means the mash left over from beer making, sludgy, bitter, but protein-rich. You mentally prepare to offer your best reed basket in exchange. You'd sell your own sandals for a slice of anything that isn't dry enough to build pyramids with. Historians still debate whether beer bread was common or mostly used in religious offerings. You're fairly certain it was both. Bread was currency, ritual, and sustenance all at once. It was used to pay workers, feed priests, and appease the gods. And here you are, just trying to make it through the day without breaking a tooth. Later, a local boy invites you to try something new, lotus bread. You blink. Lotus, as in the flower that grows in the Nile? Turns out, yes. He explains how they crush the seeds and petals, mix them with flour, and bake them into fragrant, slightly sweet flatbreads. You're skeptical, but you try it. It's chewy, floral, a little weird, but honestly, not bad. You wish you had a second piece, but the boy's already eaten the rest. That night, you sit by the fire with your last bite of barley bread and a smear of sour cheese. A feast by your standards. You think about the bakers of the big temples, the ones who had access to pure wheat, good ovens, and fresh oil. You imagine the way their bread must have smelled. Fluffy, golden, dusted with seeds or honey. You dream of breaking into a priest's kitchen and stealing a warm loaf straight from the hearth. But then you glance at your own half-eaten disc of barley crunch and realize this is yours. You made it. You didn't beg for it, didn't trade your last possession. Didn't scrape it off the bottom of a pot. It might be rough, but it's honest. Tomorrow, you'll make another. Maybe with more herbs. Maybe soaked in oil. Maybe stuffed with lentils and dreams. Whatever it is, it won't be easy, but at least it'll be yours. You take the final bite, savor it like a last line in a good story, and stretch out on your mat with a satisfied belly and a mouthful of sand-textured joy. You wake before dawn, the sky still a hazy gray and the air surprisingly cool. For a moment, it feels like anything's possible. Then your stomach growls, and reality snaps back like a taut sling. You rub your eyes and think, it's bread day. Not the stale, rock-hard chunks you've been gnawing on all week. Today, you're going to bake something new, well, newish. A fresh loaf, if the gods smile on you. You've been saving a small pouch of barley flour for this very reason, stashing it away from rodents, relatives, and especially your cousin, who once mistook it for bath powder. You light your fire, careful and patient, coaxing it with dry reeds and muttered promises. Once it catches, you feel like a magician. You warm a stone slab over the flames, then mix the flour with water in your favorite bowl, the one without too many cracks. The dough is lumpy, uneven, stubborn. You knead it with determination and a fair amount of scowling, adding a pinch of salt and a sprinkle of wild herbs you foraged from the edge of the village. They smell vaguely like mint and possibly feet, but it's flavor, and you're not complaining. You shape the loaf by hand, flattening it like a thick disc. It's not symmetrical, and there's a weird lump on one side that might be a beetle leg. You remove it and carry on. Into the fire it goes. Historians still argue over how ancient Egyptian bread was leavened. Some say sourdough starters were common. Others believe most breads were flat and dense, more like edible stones than the fluffy loaves we picture today. You have no yeast, and your idea of rising dough is more hopeful than practical. You watch the bread puff slightly around the edges. Steam rises, smelling earthy and slightly sour. You feel weirdly proud. This is craftsmanship. A meal you actually made, not just scavenged. Then the neighbor's dog appears, staring at your bread with the soulful eyes of someone who's known hunger. You hiss and wave it away. Not today, buddy. Today, this loaf is yours. While the bread cools, you nibble on a few leftover lentils, the ones that didn't turn into gray paste. Then, carefully, reverently, you tear off a piece of your bread and taste it. It's chewy, a little smoky, definitely denser than you'd like, but warm and satisfying. You close your eyes and imagine you're in a noble's estate, surrounded by baskets of warm rolls, dipping them into honey and butter. Quirky fact: some bread loaves found in tombs were so full of sand from poorly milled flour that they likely wore down people's teeth faster than time ever could. You feel every grain as your own loaf crunches between your molars, and you're suddenly aware that dentistry isn't exactly booming around here. You finish half the loaf and tuck the rest away for lunch. You're full, for now, and that's a rare feeling. Later in the day, you help your neighbor with her chores in exchange for a cup of goat milk. It's thin, a little grassy, but washes down the lingering dryness of your bread nicely. She mentions she might be making beer bread next week. You raise an eyebrow. She means the mash left over from beer making, sludgy, bitter, but protein-rich. You mentally prepare to offer your best reed basket in exchange. You'd sell your own sandals for a slice of anything that isn't dry enough to build pyramids with. Historians still debate whether beer bread was common or mostly used in religious offerings. You're fairly certain it was both. Bread was currency, ritual, and sustenance all at once. It was used to pay workers, feed priests, and appease the gods. And here you are, just trying to make it through the day without breaking a tooth. Later, a local boy invites you to try something new: lotus bread. You blink. Lotus, as in a flower that grows in the Nile? Turns out, yes. He explains how they crush the seeds and petals, mix them with flour, and bake them into fragrant, slightly sweet flatbreads. You're skeptical, but you try it. It's chewy, floral, a little weird, but honestly, not bad. You wish you had a second piece, but the boy's already eaten the rest. That night, you sit by the fire with your last bite of barley bread and a smear of sour cheese. A feast by your standards. You think about the bakers of the big temples, the ones who had access to pure wheat, good ovens, and fresh oil. You imagine the way their bread must have smelled. Fluffy, golden, dusted with seeds or honey. You dream of breaking into a priest's kitchen and stealing a warm loaf straight from the hearth. But then you glance at your own half-eaten disc of barley crunch and realize this is yours. You made it. You didn't beg for it, didn't trade your last possession, didn't scrape it off the bottom of a pot. It might be rough, but it's honest. Tomorrow, you'll make another. Maybe with more herbs. Maybe soaked in oil. Maybe stuffed with lentils and dreams. Whatever it is, it won't be easy, but at least it'll be yours. You take the final bite, savor it like a last line in a good story, and stretch out on your mat with a satisfied belly and a mouthful of sand-textured joy. The next morning begins with a headache, and not the emotional kind. No, this is a full-bodied, temple-throbbing, mouth-dry, eyes-squinting thumper. And you didn't even drink that much beer last night. Or did you? You roll over and remember. You tried the neighbor's beer bread experiment. That thick mash loaf she bragged about for 2 days. Rich in nutrients, she said. The workers at Giza's swore by it. You now suspect those workers also swore at it. You sit up slowly, blinking in the dusty sunlight, your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth. You stumble outside in search of water, which means going to the Nile again, that big, glistening wrist puddle that always smiles and says, "Come on in, the parasites are lovely." You drink sparingly, rinsing your face too. It helps barely. As you trudge back toward the cooking area, you realize something. This food, it's wearing you down. Not just in spirit, but in body. The constant chewing, the nutrient gaps, the mystery illnesses, everything's adding up. You're starting to understand why the mummified poor look like they lived through a blender. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian diet was truly healthy by ancient standards. Sure, it was rich in grains and plant matter, but protein was limited, dairy was risky, and sugar came only in honey form, if you were lucky or well-connected. Your daily meal plan has you just a few bites above survival mode. Today, you decide to go looking for something different, anything to shake up the monotony. You remember hearing about wild snacks that some gatherers collect, acacia pods, tamarisk fruits, even papyrus root if you're really desperate. You start your search near the edge of the fields, where crops fade into overgrown thickets. You spot a fig tree. Hooray! But it's already been picked clean. You pick up a half-eaten one off the ground, consider it, and then toss it aside. Even you have standards. Barely. Then you find a few small pods hanging from a low shrub. Acacia. Supposedly edible if you boil it long enough and don't mind the bitter taste of regret. You gather a few and head home. You boil the pods, letting the bitterness hiss out of them in little clouds of steam. The smell is not inviting, but you stir anyway. Maybe this is what resilience smells like. You sip the broth. It's grassy, gritty, and somehow manages to taste like both dirt and sadness. You chew one pod experimentally. Crunchy. Not bad. Possibly poisonous. Quirky fact. Some Egyptian papyri describe eating marsh plants during hard times. Stalks, tubers, even bitter roots that made your mouth go numb. You start to understand how desperate you'd have to be to start chewing on swamp grass. Later, a merchant passes through your village, offering dried onions and salted locusts. You raise an eyebrow. Locusts? He grins and opens a pouch. Inside, shriveled bugs, legs folded still intact. He offers you a free sample. You nibble one. Crunchy. Salty. Somehow not bad. You raise your other eyebrow. He sees your interest and pushes harder. Full of protein, he says, and keeps forever. You think about the leftover lentils at home, now growing a questionable fuzz. You hand over a few reeds and take a small pouch of bugs. You don't tell anyone. That night, you roast a few of them with leftover herbs. They crackle over the fire and smell slightly nutty. You chew one slowly. The texture is crispy with a satisfying snap. The flavor? Smoky, not as buggy as you feared. You eat 5 more. Historians still debate whether locusts were a common snack or just famine food. Either way, they were real, they were eaten, and they were weirdly effective. You suddenly feel energized. It's either protein or panic. Hard to tell. You decide to go full rogue and mash a few into your lentil paste. It's gritty, savory, not awful. The biggest shock? You're kind of full afterward. You lean back, letting your stomach do its thing while the fire dies down. You think about all the strange foods you've eaten this week. Mystery fish, acacia pods, swamp herbs, and now bugs. You imagine explaining your diet to a modern listener. Yeah, we mostly eat bread made of rocks and bugs cooked over open flame. No, we're not trying to start a trendy restaurant. It's just Tuesday. Still, there's a strange sense of pride in it. You've survived on less. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, you feel like you outsmarted the system. You didn't beg for scraps. You didn't choke on stale bread. You found food. You made it work. Maybe you won't grow up to be a priest or scribe. Maybe your tomb won't be stocked with golden loaves or lotus honey cakes. But you will have eaten. You will have lived. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, you might even try roasting beetles. Just to see. It's just after dawn again, and you're already sweating. The kind of sweat that clings before the day even earns it. You wipe your forehead and trudge through the pale light, heading toward the barley field you've helped tend since you could walk. Except today, it's not work you're after, it's gossip. The kind that comes with shared food, secret stashes, and maybe, if you're lucky, something sweet. You spot old Mary sitting on an overturned basket, chewing thoughtfully. Her cheeks are puffed out, and you approach cautiously. What's in your mouth? You ask. She grins wide. Honey dates. You blink. Ow! She leans in. The priest's wife sent them over for her cousin's wedding. And I may have borrowed too. You sit beside her instantly, your stomach practically applauding. She offers you one. It's sticky, soft, golden. You bite in, and for a few seconds, the world is perfect. Sugary, rich, chewy. The date melts across your tongue, and the bit of honey crystallizes on your teeth like edible treasure. It's the first thing you've eaten in weeks that didn't feel like a dare. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian had regular access to sweets or if it was a luxury reserved for temple offerings and special occasions. Given your life experience, you know where your money is. Quirky fact. Honey was not only a food sweetener, but also used in medicine, beauty treatments, and even embalming. Which means the honey you just enjoyed might also be what they'll coat your body in one day. Comforting. You chew slowly, savoring every second. The flavor sticks around like a good memory. You ask Mary if there's more. She chuckles. Not unless you know how to sneak into the priest's pantry. You consider it, briefly. Then you remember the guards. And the priest's wife's nose for theft. She once sniffed out a missing cake crumb from across the temple courtyard. Back home, you dig into your modest stash of preserved foods. More lentil mush, a crumb of yesterday's bread, and a sliver of goat cheese that has clearly begun a slow journey into sentience. You scrape off the fuzzy edge and eat the rest anyway. Waste not, die not. You notice something odd. The lentils taste different, not in a new flavor kind of way. More in a, maybe these fermented and are now judging you kind of way. You pause, but hunger wins. That night, your stomach stages a protest. You curl up on your mat as it churns. There's a symphony going on in there. Rumbling, gurgling, and the occasional sharp twinge like it's throwing tiny spears at your insides. You groan softly. Food poisoning isn't a term you know yet, but you've felt it before. Usually after bad fish, moldy beer mash, or those beetles you didn't roast quite long enough. And every time, it reminds you that food in Egypt isn't just hard to find. It's occasionally trying to murder you. Historians still debate how common digestive illness was among commoners. Sanitation wasn't exactly modern, and food storage often meant wrapping something in reeds and hoping the sun didn't rot it. It's no surprise you're doubled over in the dark. You curl tighter, wishing for a healer or at least a nice clean bowl to throw up in. Instead, you get a reed basket with a hole in it. Luxury. The next day, you can barely eat. Your stomach is sulking. You nibble on dry bread, sip boiled water, and avoid anything with the potential to fight back. Mary brings you a roasted date wrapped in a fig leaf. You could cry. It's warm, soft, and doesn't make your gut yell. You eat it slowly, grateful. Sweetness, again, the rarest flavor in your whole reality. You think about sweets, real sweets. You've heard stories of cakes made for temple offerings, date-filled, honey-soaked, dusted with crushed nuts. You dream of fig tarts and milk pastries. One man claimed he saw a honeyed goose once, stuffed with spiced barley and candied fruit. You called him a liar, but secretly hoped he wasn't. Some feast days offer a chance to glimpse these delicacies, if you're lucky enough to hang around temple kitchens. You've done it once, even licked a drop of honey from a leaf that fluttered off an offering tray. It was divine, but sweets like that, they're not for the likes of you. You get salt if you're lucky, and if it's sweet, it probably means something fermented. Still, those rare moments, a honey date, a fig in season, a drop of syrup, they stick with you. You wonder what life would be like if sweets weren't rare, if sugar was cheap and everywhere, if children didn't squeal just for the idea of sweet fruit, if dessert was a thing that came after meals, not instead of them. You try to imagine your next treat, whenever that may come. Maybe the priest's cousin will get married again. Maybe a passing merchant will trade syrup for your reed basket. Or maybe, just maybe, Mary will borrow another honey date. Until then, you rest, stomach quieter, lips sticky with the memory of something rare and golden. You wake to the scent of something burning. Not fire burning, just that faintly toasted, possibly edible kind of burning. You sit up fast, your heart doing a little dance of fear and curiosity. Did someone drop bread again? Or is it your neighbor experimenting with clay oven innovation again? Last time, she tried to bake lentil patties on a roof tile. It did not end well. You peek outside and find a crowd huddled near the edge of the village. That can mean only two things. Either someone's trying to sell a goat with extra legs again, or something rare is being cooked. You inch closer and catch a whiff of roasted meat. Actual meat. You crane your neck and spot it. A skewered duck, roasting over a small fire, dripping fat onto the hot coals. Your stomach instantly stages a flash mob level protest. You haven't had meat in weeks, maybe months. Historians still argue whether everyday Egyptians had regular access to meat or if it was mostly a luxury tied to religious festivals and hunting elites. The truth? If you're poor, it's mostly bones and wishful thinking. You ask the cook, some visiting relative of a scribe, what's the occasion? He shrugs. Leftovers from a noble's feast. They gave us the bones. We found some scraps. You nod solemnly, then hover like a vulture, hoping for a sliver. Eventually, your persistence pays off. A child hands you a small, greasy piece of skin. You pop it into your mouth with reverence. It's crispy, smoky, and rich. A flash of umami. For a moment, you swear you hear harp music. You let the taste linger, even if your stomach wants more. Especially because it wants more. But meat, real meat, is rare. You usually get protein from lentils, beans, or if you're lucky, the occasional fish. Sometimes your uncle spears a tilapia from the canal, but most of the time it's just the idea of meat floating around in soup as if to say, I was here once. Quirky fact, some poorer Egyptians would flavor their porridge with animal fat, if they could get it, as a cheap way to make it feel like a meat dish. You've done that yourself, once boiling goat bones for 2 days just to get a hint of flavor in your barley mash. Later that day, the village gathers for a small offering to one of the household gods, Tarit, the hippo goddess who watches over pregnancies and kitchens. There's music, incense, and yes, food. Mostly bread and beer, but someone brought a tray of stuffed dates. The sweet kind. You count your blessings. You make an offering, a single lentil cake shaped vaguely like a hippo, if that hippo had been stepped on. Still, the gesture is there. You whisper a hope, better food, fewer stomach aches, and maybe one day, meat with the bones still attached. Historians still debate how much the average Egyptian household relied on religious rituals for food access. Some argue temple handouts were a crucial supplement for the poor, while others believe offerings mostly benefited priests and scribes. You're pretty sure it's both. The gods get first dibs, but sometimes the crumbs make their way back down to you. That night, your cousin comes back from a long day in the fields with a secret. He's caught a frog. You blink. You're not serious. He nods. Cooked one last month. Tastes like river chicken. You pause. You're not even surprised anymore. You agree to try it. He cleans it with surprising care, skewers it, and roasts it over a small fire. The smell? Surprisingly pleasant. Smoky. Like game meat if game meat had flippers. You bite in. It's rubbery, with a hint of mud and mystery herbs. But it's protein. Your body says thank you even while your brain screams. What are we doing? You fall asleep that night, full enough to dream. You dream of a grand feast. Piles of roasted goose, honeyed fish, lamb with garlic, endless jugs of beer. And no one fights over scraps. You wake hungry, but weirdly hopeful. Your body is changing. Stronger? Not really, but smarter. You're learning what your gut can handle, which weeds are edible, how to trick your taste buds into thinking barley paste is soup if you stir fast enough. You're adapting, and so is everyone else. Food in Egypt isn't just survival. It's a daily negotiation. A gamble. A whispered prayer between hunger pangs. You watch a passing hawk circle above the village. Someone mutters, bad omen. Someone else says, maybe it dropped meat once. You chuckle softly and walk toward the canal. Maybe today's the day the fish are feeling generous. And if not, there's always frogs. Or salted locusts. Or your uncle's fish jerky, which smells like fear and disappointment, but gets the job done. You wonder if anyone in the future will ever eat like this and choose to. You imagine someone crunching a roasted cricket for fun, sipping fermented lentil broth, and calling it authentic. You laugh out loud. If only they knew. The last few days blur together in a haze of dust, salt, and that dull ache behind your eyes that only comes from chewing way too much barley. The village feels quieter, slower, as if even the sun has given up trying to shine on your sad, grain-smeared face. You wake to the sound of bees buzzing near your door. Not the mystical kind, just real bees, real wings doing their real job. You take it as a sign. Maybe today's the day you get a second taste of honey. Or maybe it's just another chance to get stung trying. You follow the buzzing to a tree near the edge of the fields where, sure enough, someone's trying to smoke out a wild hive. It's a risky business. Honey is precious, not just sweet, valuable, sacred even, used in rituals, medicine, offerings, sometimes even payment. Historians still argue whether honey was widely consumed or hoarded by the elite. You don't need a scroll to know the answer. If it's good, it rarely ends up in your bowl. Still, you manage to snag a tiny sliver of comb, more wax than syrup, but sweet enough to make your tongue buzz. You roll in your mouth like treasure, pressing every trace of nectar out with your tongue before finally spitting the wax. You watch it drop onto the ground like a squash dream. Later, you're asked to help prepare food for a small procession. Nothing fancy, just beer, bread, and figs for the workers hauling temple bricks. You mix the mash with practice motions now. You become efficient at blending flour and ash, adding crushed dates for flavor, if any are left. You make a joke. I add extra sand. It's the crunch people crave. Someone laughs. You both know it's not a joke. You take a moment to reflect on your growing skills. You can now bake a flatbread over coals without burning it. Spot spoiled lentils by smell alone. Stretch a single onion into 2 meals and 1 bad soup. Roast almost anything over fire, frogs, bugs, regrets. You're practically a survival chef now, a culinary warrior of the crumbling, pre-industrial world. Quirky fact, there's evidence of people using crocodile dung in certain ancient recipes. Not for flavor, thank RA, but for supposed medicinal purposes. That's a line you're not crossing. Not unless someone offers you a honey-glazed duck in return. Tonight's dinner is modest. Bread, again. You find a piece that's only partly burned. A few onions, boiled until they surrender. You mash it all into a thick porridge and eat slowly. You feel the fatigue in your bones. The kind that comes not from work, but from malnutrition. You're not starving, exactly. But you're never quite full. Your body's always half listening for food. Historians debate how widespread chronic undernourishment was among laborers. Some say it was rare, that Egypt's food system was robust. Others say, sure, if you were close to temple surplus or wealthy landowners. You're just thankful for days without stomach cramps. You look around your small home. Reed mats, clay bowls, the smell of salt and old barley lingering in the corners. It's not glamorous, but it's yours. And you've managed to survive this long, on stale bread, swamp plants, river frogs, and a tiny bit of stubbornness. Still, you wonder what it's all for. No one carves your name on the side of a pyramid for surviving a bad lentil week. No temple mural shows a kid roasting bugs just to get by. You exist in the margins, your story written in crumbs and salt lines on your lips. But maybe that's the point. You've tasted every scrap of what Egypt has to offer its most ordinary citizens. Not the golden feasts of pharaohs, but the daily grind of grinding grain. Not the sacred honey cakes, but the bitter pods and cracked teeth bread. And despite it all, you're still here. So tonight, you boil your last lentils with a few wild herbs, let the pot simmer, and breathe in the steam like it's perfume. You take a bite and smile, because somehow it doesn't taste like failure tonight. It tastes like proof. Proof that even in a world where food tries to kill you, you figured out how to live. So now, as the last embers of your little fire die down and the night wraps around you like a soft, scratchy linen blanket, you feel it settling, an ancient quiet. The kind of quiet that hums with the distant echoes of grinding stones, simmering pots, and soft laughter over scraps. The stars blink down over a hungry land, the Nile whispering secrets in the distance. You listen to your breath, slow and steady, a rhythm older than papyrus, older than the pyramids, older than the first barley seed ever crushed under stone. And maybe, just maybe, you realize something in the dark. This journey through Egypt's kitchens wasn't about hunger alone. It was about endurance, about flavor found in the unlikeliest places, about community built on shared crumbs, and about how sometimes survival itself is a kind of feast. Your eyes grow heavier now, the dreams circling close. Maybe tonight you'll float down the Nile in a boat made of bread, sipping honey beer under a crescent moon. Or maybe you'll just rest deeply, belly quiet, knowing you've made it through another ancient day. So breathe slowly, melt into the mat beneath you, and let the hush of history lull you. You're safe now. You're full enough. You're home. Sweet dreams.